This will be a kind of like a fireside chat between Nimmy and Yvonne, and I'll let them get into it.
Is this working? Yeah.
Amazing. It's wonderful to be with all of you today, and welcome. Right, this is the last panel of the day. I think we have a hard time kind of following the act of the other two, but we'll give it a shot, Yvonne. Yvonne, would you like to, before we start, would you like to, give a little bit more background about yourself, like how you got here, what's your story?
Sure. How far back do you want me to go?
1 minute, let's go.
So I started out in investment banking at Goldman's, did that for a short period of time, realized very early on that it wasn't for me. So my parents were very unhappy when I told them that I was leaving it because they wanted me to just climb through the ranks and become a managing director at some point. Went traveling and then went into strategy consulting as I wanted to be closer to companies. And early in investment banking, you don't actually get that exposure to companies. Oftentimes, you're just buried in a spreadsheet. And then I came into venture in 2015, so I feel like a bit of a dinosaur now in this space. So originally it was with Mitsui, a Japanese investment company, where I was investing across Europe, Middle East, and Africa. I lived in South Africa, Israel, Japan, and yeah, that was kind of where my Africa investment journey started from. Made a lot of losses, but you learn from your losses in this space. And I joined Impact X in 2019, so that's a fund focus on underrepresented entrepreneurs. And yeah, did that for a few years, built the fund up from scratch before joining LocalGlobe in 2022.
That's amazing. I don't agree with the word dinosaur. That's the only thing I would challenge. It's called experience. My name is Nimmy Mathews. I'm Indian origin, by the way. Probably easy to guess from my accent. I work with Amazon Web Services, and I am an EMEA Sales leader for their startups segment. In my time with Amazon, I've worked with different types of teams. So I've led organizations that were new business. So launching businesses that go from 0 to 1, very different from businesses that are trading in few billions of dollars. But some of those aspects remain the same. I think the previous panel spoke about having the right team. Is incredibly important between any types of organizations that we lead. I'm incredibly passionate about retaining women in the workforce. And at Amazon, I am also the executive sponsor for Maternity Experience and Return to Work. And our mandate is to help women find career continuity and comfort when they make the choice to have children. So that's kind of a personal passion project of mine. And with that, let's get straight to the questions, right? Yvonne, could you share, let's get you in the hot seat straight away. Could you share the trends that you're spotting for investing patterns for female-founded startups?
Yeah, I mean, the data is very depressing. The numbers continue to go down. So we've seen that, less than 3% in the globally. And if you look at Black female founders, that's less than 1%, which is absolutely ridiculous. So the data is not great. However, I have the privilege of, working with some incredible female founders on a daily basis. And, I think the bias is very real in the industry. And that's because as an investor, you are going to relate more to those that look like you, come from a similar background to you. And if you look at all those with the check writing capabilities, they tend to be, males, white males. And so they are going to go for, just like the same way I tend to gravitate more towards Black founders, Black female founders, they gravitate more to those that look familiar to them.
I agree with the word depressing. So I think the number was 1.9. So globally, I think out of all the money that's out there, 1.9% went to women. And funny fact, like in 1 year, it dipped from 2.4% to 1.9%. And think about that knife's edge, right? Just how small the numbers are, and they continue to get smaller. So this is a number we must really protect and grow. To bring that in dollar terms, for every $1 that went to a female founder, $25 went to a male founder. So that's not great either. But when I was also like, sometimes there's also light at the end of the tunnel, right? Because if you look at female-founded startups, so that includes those with mixed founders, not just female-only founded startups. Some positive trends over there, especially in Africa versus Europe even, right? So 20% of startups have at least one female founder on them that have received funding. In comparison, 5% in Europe. So I think Africa has something to teach Europe as well. So that I found was at least some positive light at the end of the tunnel for as far as trends were concerned. And are you seeing a change in trend though, or do the numbers remain small, Yvonne? Like, what's your read on that?
Yeah, I think that the numbers continue to get worse. Over the last 2 years, the numbers have actually been declining. So I think 2020, 2021, we saw a slight increase in funding that goes to female founders, but that's declined again in recent years. And I think that's partly because, where the market has, gone through a bit of a dip, they say that investors tend to retreat to what they know, essentially, and what they're most comfortable with. And unfortunately, like, investing in female founders is seen as more risky. And you see that even when the due diligence taking place, whereby investors ask more risk-related questions to female founders versus their male counterparts. And so there's definitely a lot more work to be done.
Keeping that's the overall business context, can you share a little bit more about your experience of investing in Africa?
Yeah, sure. So I've been investing in Africa since 2015, and back at that time, I would say that the ecosystem was really just starting. And one of the questions at the time was, are we going to see exits in Africa? I think we've started to see that, but we're still very early. And people need to realize that, 2015 is less than 10 years ago. And typically when we invest in companies, the idea is that, we won't see an exit for at least 10, 12 years. And so it's still pretty early in the ecosystem. And I think people just need to recognize that. One thing I like to do is actually compare, and it'd be great to hear your perspective on this, compare the African ecosystem with the Indian ecosystem, because I think there are some parallels, just that we're probably a decade and a bit behind. And so, yes, things are still very early, but I do see there being a strong trajectory going forward. And I'm really excited about the opportunity on the continent.
And what are some of the challenges that you're seeing? And, what's causing some of these challenges that you see in the market?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, so we've done 13 investments in Africa. And I think during 2020, 2021, when the markets were obviously booming, a lot of VCs from America, from all over the world started to invest in Africa. When the markets started to dip slightly, all of those investors retreated. So it just means that where it comes to that follow-on funding, Series A and beyond, it's become a lot tougher. And that's where we do need more local funds in order to plug that gap. And we're starting to see that happen now, so it's great. But definitely more that needs to happen on the funding side.
That's completely, that's a great insight, right? And I really liked what you said earlier about, I guess, the questions that are asked to female founders versus male founders. The question about risk versus future potential asked to male founders is a big one. It's funny, there's actually research on this, and it plays out in different ways as well. It's the confidence also of female founders. Yeah. So overwhelmingly, there's 5% of female founders who say that they have a high confidence that the company will turn a profit, whereas 30% of male founders are incredibly confident. And back to your point of, early stage funding and the years when this was really on a boom, early stage funding is also a lot about perception, right? Of the founder that's in front of you. And when you have one group that's highly confident, right, versus the other group that is not as confident, it makes a difference. And I think they went and did a study of some of these, female founders versus male founders, and, those who had the high degree of confidence versus not. And funny enough, the financial outcomes were the same, right? So they both performed, in the same way. And I think that confidence element is everything in early stage funding. So that was incredible. I think it's also a numbers game, right? It means far fewer female founded startups in the early stages versus male. So as you go up, it's, that pyramid effect playing up, right? And the other aspect is, I guess, the sectors that are getting funded, right? And could you maybe shine a light on that? Is what the driving, fintech versus the other sectors, and yeah.
Yeah, so up until last year, I think fintech has definitely been the dominant sector that's received funding on the continent, and that's the case in the UK as well, so not just in Africa. I think increasingly we're seeing more attention being given to other segments as well, which is great. I haven't seen any trends in terms of female founders gravitating more towards one sector, to be honest. One thing that we have noticed as a team, though, coming back to what you mentioned around confidence, we do find that there are more successful female founders on the continent as opposed to here in the UK. Confidence plays such a huge part in it. And like you said, at the early stage, it's very much about narrative. And so we're buying into the vision, the story. And if you don't have that confidence, that can really limit the potential that the investor sees. And so one thing I always like to encourage female founders is just go in and just don't be afraid to really just highlight what you're building and how great you are, because men are not afraid to do it. So why should we?
There's a few men laughing in the audience. But there was also another strain, right? One is the difference in vertical or segment. The other one was where women are seeking their funding from, right? Equity versus other channels. Do you have any insights to share about the preferred channels for raising investment? So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there is data that shows that women tend to take a lot longer to raise VC funding, and that means that they may get alternative means of funding initially, whether it be grant funding and alternative means. But I think that I would say that if you are building a venture-backed business, then just go for it. Just, have the confidence in yourself, bet on yourself, and go for it.
That's incredible. I bet on yourself. I think that's an incredible bit. Also in line with that confidence thing that we discussed before. So how has your investment strategy evolved, right?
Yeah.
In order to better support and empower underrepresented?
So I'd say that I've been investing since 2015, and I think it's evolved quite a bit since then, because before that it was very much like the market. However, what I've come to realize over the years is it really is just a bet on the founder, because it's the founder at the early stage that is going to navigate the entire journey, and it's not easy, right? And so where you're on this journey that you're building a company, you are going to face bumps and hurdles along the way. And so one thing that I do is spend a lot of time with teams before we invest. Spend time getting to know them. One question I always ask is, what do you want? And I always get asked, what do you mean, what do I want? And I say, answer as you wish. It's such a telling answer. Because at the end of the day, I'm a VC, right? And so we do want those billion-dollar outcomes. And that's not for everyone. Some people may want to run a business that, reaches a certain level. But if it's not VC, that's fine, because it's only a small segment of companies that do raise VC funding, right? And I think that being a woman myself, when I do meet with women founders, I do try to just spend more time with them and just understand, if they don't have that confidence, then how can I distill that drive and ambition and what's really making you want to change the world with what you're building, right? And sometimes it does take spending that extra time with individuals in order for that to come through. So it's just about being more proactive.
Pulling on that thread a little bit, can you maybe share with the audience, right, an answer that's really impressed you when you've asked somebody what it is that you want? Because this is everything.
Yeah.
This is everything.
Oftentimes, the founders that really impress me are the ones that I want to change the world. It's the ones that are frustrated with the way in which the world works, and they see a completely different way of the world working, and they're like, I have to change this. Like, it's almost like they have a chip on their shoulder, and they're really driven to bring about that change, and not just like minute change, but this is like change that is literally going to transform the world. And I always use the example of Uber. So before Uber, we were getting like mini cabs. I was thinking about it the other day. We were getting mini cabs. We'd have to like call them, wait, take cash out the bank. Uber has literally changed the world. I cannot live without Uber right now. And so that's the type of companies we want to invest in. Companies that are literally going to transform the way that we live and do things. Those that are really changing how the world operates.
It's incredible. Sometimes it starts from a customer problem, and you're looking at another big customer of Uber.
Yeah.
Cannot imagine life without it. I'd also, share how, Amazon Web Services is helping startups, right? I think similar to your firm. I think one element is we're a big believer of the power of startups. So we've been investing in startups, have dedicated, sales and business development teams that are based locally. And we also have a dedicated team for underrepresented founders. And that includes women, people of color. And so there's an incredible focus to making things better, right? We're not satisfied with the way things are today. Coupled with investments in Africa as well. So we've got 2 offices now in Africa. We've got a local region there in South Africa. And so that's another element of, how we're supporting, all right? And I think someone in the previous panel, again, I'd like to go back to that, which is it'll come down to the people. And it's interesting, there's a report that says, 3 in 4 companies will actually want to invest in technology by 2027. And that is going to create 2.7 million jobs. But there's a slight problem, though. That will require 67% of the current workforce to get trained up in technical skills. And only half of these people have access to do so, right? So that's a big, big gap right there. And without people, I don't believe anything is possible, right? So since 2015, we've, AWS has trained over 100,000 people in South Africa, but that's kind of a drop in the ocean, right? When you think of the 2.7 million and the 100,000, it's small. We need to improve. And so we have a global mission now to train 29 million people by 2025. And as part of that, we've opened our first AWS Skills Center in South Africa. So it's an incredible, it's a mission really to get this talent ready for what the future needs. And then coming back to how we specifically help startups outside of the larger kind of AWS work in Africa, we have, I hope everyone here is aware of our flagship program offering. It's called AWS Activate. It helps startups get started with business support, training and resources, and also promotional credits to get started building on AWS, right? Because that's incredibly important in the early days. So these are some of the ways in which we support startups, and we're here to partner. My team work with startups right from the very, very early stages all over to when things get a little more down the life cycle. But yeah,
I love that. And I guess question for you: what are some of the success stories that you've seen on the continent with the work that you do with AWS?
There's a lot of successful stories that we've seen, especially when we look at the fintech space, right? And you asked me a question before of how it relates to the Indian startup ecosystem. I think again it's also very cultural, right? There's a huge cultural element to sometimes when there isn't an external force that's helping you. People get really entrepreneurial, and there's a huge element of let's solve this, and that tendency to solve things result in more innovation than we've seen in other parts of the world. Sometimes in more developed economies, especially in fintech, the level of innovation is incredible. The level of mobile penetration within fintech is incredible, right? And so a lot of our customers and companies are starting to innovate around that space, and those are some of the biggest stories we've seen. And that starts from a customer problem, people wanting to change the world, right? So I think there's definitely a common strain there. One of the other challenges I would say, which is similar, between the continents and in India, and I speak here more as my experience of being an Indian, not from working with customers, because that's my not in my regional influence, is also the challenge and the opportunity of scale and solving that unit economics problem, because the charges per user are also quite lower compared to developed economies. So that's one of the challenges that needs to be solved. But in that lies the opportunity to really, really get set up right from the start. And so those are some of the common strains we've seen, some great success stories coming out of the continent. I want to flip back to you, Yvonne, and to say, how can investors, operators, and other stakeholders in the ecosystem help address these challenges?
Yeah, I think that, one of the ways in which we address this, like I said earlier, the bias is very real. And so I think that what we need is more diversity when it comes to the investors on the continent. And so there are some great initiatives which are really trying to work towards that. So I don't know if Nikita's in here, but there's Include VC, which is training, diverse individuals. Hi, Nikita. She's Include VC, which is training, it's a fellowship to train VCs. And ultimately, because those that have the power to write the checks determine who gets invested in, and there's data that proves that women are 2-3 times more likely to invest in women-led companies. And so we need more women check writers, and we are starting to see that, but it is going to take time, right? And so I think that's one of the ways we tackle this issue. And I think there's also great initiatives when it comes to angel investing, because again, if you look at the angel investing landscape, it does still tend to be dominated by males. And so there's an angel investing school which is training individuals to angel invest as well. And I think that's another way in which we diverse the investor base.
That's incredible. It's wonderful to see female founders and investors paying it forward, right? Because I think that's that ripple effect for how we close this gap over time, and that's an incredible story. Someone spoke about community. I think this was blessing in the first panel, right? Can you maybe talk more about that? Let's pull on that thread a little bit, right? How can networking, mentorship, and access to resources play a part in supporting startups?
Absolutely. This is such an important question, because one of the things I truly believe is you can't be what you can't see. And one of the reasons why I personally believe why we don't see as many female founders as we would like is because there's just not that many role models, right? And so one of the things I've been working on actually as a podcast, just to bring about that exposure for individuals to share real, relatable stories about their journeys. And in Africa, you see it across the board. You see women building great things. But I think in the UK, we do need more examples to be showcased so that people, I think someone shared the example, I think it was Caleb shared the example in Estonia where someone said, my friend from Skype did it, so I can do it too. And I feel like that definitely needs to happen more here.
That's incredible. I love that Estonian example as well, right? Completely agree about the power of networking, and not just networking, but I think networking sometimes can also be like a bit of a overused word. I mean, someone said overrated or underrated, probably overrated, right? Because I think networking with purpose,
exactly,
is a big difference from the plain old networking, right?
Yeah, and I mean, building a company is so hard. And so if you are going to be on that journey, just having a peer group of individuals that you can speak to, if one day your product gets hacked, for example, you can speak to individuals about that. Like just having that peer group of individuals where you can just share the challenges that you're facing and just be real and raw about what you're going through, I think is so important.
Incredible. We've that thing of, and also what you said about what doesn't get seen doesn't get heard, right? Which I thought was a really valuable insight in there. Last year, AWS actually started these demo days that we call them, and we put female founders as well as investors in the same room, partners and customers, and let the pitching begin. And so last year we did this across 17 cities, 5 continents. I think it's a great way to get started, right? If it will, get started. And also this partnership with this event today is also a result of a volunteer community within AWS that's wanting to change the technology landscape. It's called Women at Startups. And so it's a lot of grassroots activity to help that go along. And I was also but you started in the beginning saying the statistics are a bit depressing, right? I think something, material needs to change in the way we do business, right? Because if things sort of trickle along, it takes 140 years to close the gap. That statistic was the most scary of the lot to me. So, is there something that you believe could be that change that needs to happen, right? Just as you're so impressed by, the founders that come to you to say, what needs to change? Do you have a view on that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I found most helpful, so if you look at the largest funds in the UK, they tend to invest in founders that have that operational experience. And I think that it could really help if you are thinking about building a startup to actually have experience working at a startup yourself or work within a domain so you have that deep domain expertise. Because obviously if you look at like all the great companies in the world, some of them have been spun out by individuals that have worked at another startup and then they've gone on to start something else themselves. And I'd also say that there's so many resources available online these days that is probably the easiest time to build a business. And so I'll just give you an example of a founder that I worked with, female founder. She hadn't worked within tech at all or a startup, and she set out to build a business. So she literally took herself away outside of London for a period of 3 months, and she just immersed herself in all things startup. So she was like watching every single YC school video, understanding how people pitch, and she came away after that period of time, and I kid you not, she sounded like a Silicon Valley founder. Like she just had that energy. And so because there are those resources available online, I feel like the onus is also on you to actually go out there, seek the resources, and upskill yourself on what it really takes to build a business, what it takes to fundraise, and really just equip yourself and enable yourself to, I guess, go out there with confidence that, what you're going to do is going to resonate with the investors and so on that you're going to speak to.
That's incredible advice, right? I was also really pleased to see this movement by Digital Collective Africa, for the Gender Diversity Pledge. And a number of investors have signed up there. Amazon Web Services also signed up in order to take, concrete actions to improve this. With the intent of improving funding into underrepresented founders by 30%. And fun fact, as soon as people agree to be signatories to this pledge, they have to declare how much, how many of their corpus goes into female funded startups, which I think is an interesting statistic. Just to say it loud is a start, right? And then to work from there, it takes great courage, but saying it is a start. What are some of the sectors or areas that you think are ripe for disruption? If you had to give some advice to this audience that's listening to us.
Yeah, I mean, some areas that I'm pretty excited about, climate, healthcare. I've spent most of my investing career investing in fintech, but increasingly we're seeing really exciting opportunities within the healthcare, health tech and climate. And I think that when it comes to climate specifically, Africa is going to be at disadvantage despite being like one of the lowest emitters. I think the impact of climate on Africa is actually going to be quite significant. And so seeing some really exciting opportunities come out of Africa when it comes to tackling climate change as well.
Incredible. And I know the clock is almost up, right? And I want to maybe take the opportunity, Yvonne, to ask you on behalf of folks who are listening, what advice would you give someone who wanted to make it?
Yeah, I think that there's just so much resources out there, and so go deep in a problem that you're trying to solve. Speak to your customers. Like nothing beats that. Just get something out. I think a lot of times people have great ideas in their head, but at the end of the day, it's only as great as it can be if it's in your head, and you don't actually know whether the market will take to it until you get it out. And so if you have an idea, just be scrappy, get it out, and then see what comes from that.
Amazing. There's a saying, right? Perfect is the enemy of good. Like sometimes it's just good to get started, even if it's not perfect, and improve over a period of time. I think that was it for us today. Thank you so much.